This is Jeff, and I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter. You don't have to be, but I do have something important to tell you that we need to address. Bernie has called for a political revolution. He says that's what we need in order to make our government more responsive to us. A large part of that is the act of voting, and that's what I'm going to go on about. You might call this my button-down Jeremiah on voting. So let's go. Essentially, all eligible voters need to do two things. First, vote in your primary and vote in the general election. And that means not just president, but all the representatives you're entitled to vote for. You need to look at them for how they'll complement each other. You need to get them all into office, and they need to reflect your values and what you think the government needs to do for us. That inevitably leads to number two, vote intelligently. Like the old saw about work smarter, not harder. You should vote smarter too. That means look at the big picture. Put all the issues and policies that the candidate supports in balance. Prioritize, but also keeping in balance all the things that are necessary to do. That becomes simpler if you're a one-issue, hot-button kind of voter, but that's a foolish way of looking at it. You're essentially saying that your feelings override any thinking about what needs to be done. You're just a one-issue person, or, that's the issue I know about. I'm not going to look any further because that's too much trouble. It's just you don't want to be bothered in doing anything other than your gut feeling. You are a problem. And I would put it this way, slightly sarcastically. As Mitt Romney might suggest, just self-deport yourself from the voting booth and sit it out if you're a one-issue person. That's your drug. I'd say a drug of non-choice because the issue probably chose you more than you chose it. And as a former First Lady once said about drugs, just say no. Okay? All right, to get serious again for a moment. It is important to do the kind of voting I'm talking about, especially if you're progressive or liberal. It's vital, in fact. And here's psychologically why. The voters who are most likely to vote consistently and regularly tend to be right-wing and conservative in their frame of mind. Psychological study has shown recently there's an area of the brain, the amygdala, that's especially enlarged or gets a really good workout in voters of this type. That amygdala is associated with emotional memory and the processing of fear. Fear especially is the key here because it's a kind of inbuilt motivation to vote against what you fear. All that needs to happen is it needs to either self-activate or be manipulated by politicians who raise the fear. That fear can be at a low level in general, kind of free-floating anxiety, or it can be ramped up by being prodded and provoked into being attached to something specific. Usually ends up being an other class that's a problem. You know the syndrome. I don't have to say any more about that. But what it results in is a kind of coordinated group, a herd mentality to vote with others who are righteously fearful like you to get something addressed, attacked, or quelled. No more thinking. Need apply. We are the Star Trek Borg. We have been assimilated. On the other side, you've got what we'll loosely call the liberal mind, which is involved with another part of the mind and basically looks at making decisions that are based on fact and reason. I would say there's more to it than that results in a problem with that way of thinking when it comes to voting. Basically, we're turned on by the experimentation and variety of new experience, being open to new experiences, new people, new shared realities. That achieves a general sense of well-being. At our peak moments, a sense of joy. But that can be a hazard. It's not as pointed and all-consuming as fear, which is very much more directed. You can do a lot of general well-being before you realize you're not so happy anymore. Hey, what's wrong with society? Maybe I need to do something to correct this by acting on my convictions. That can occur very late in the day when it gets to that point, and it's very much like climate change then. You can wait too long. When it really starts to hurt, it may be too late to do anything useful. Let's hope that's not the case with climate change, but let's make it not the case with voting. Okay, let's go turn now to the non-voter. I've got words for you. Let me put you into two categories, broadly speaking. One is the principled pessimist that doesn't think the system works, so they don't vote. The other is the, I'm not political, I don't get involved with this stuff, I just mind my own business and my own life, so I don't vote. First type, the pessimist can be very intelligent, usually even progressive, but they have assessed the system as being, based on its past performances, it's corrupt to the core. Nothing ever gets done. You can even find studies that say the general will of the voters is never or very seldom addressed. It's random noise practically. The whole thing is so corrupt. Let's not vote, let it collapse, and then we'll build something new. Maybe without thinking too much of what the consequences of that collapse would be, they take this outlook. Nevertheless, I take it seriously. I entertain that, but I say, maybe you're right. I sure hope you're not, but maybe. However, we need to do the experiment properly first. When you do an experiment, a scientific experiment, you control for the variable you want to test. That variable is voting of the type I've been explaining, consistently and intelligently. We've never done that as a society. If you do that sort of thing and you still don't get results, a government that's responsive to us, then you can say, I proved my case. But let's do the experiment first, shall we? Put in some sweat equity. Now, the other kind of voter, I'm not political, I mind my own business in my own life. Some would say that's a rationalization for laziness, but however you look at it, I think there's another thing behind that as well. That's the overwhelming myth of the individual, especially in American culture, though it's, pandemic to Western civilization. That's the primacy, the supremacy of the individual. So you get a lot of head nodding when people recall Margaret Thatcher's saying, there is no such thing as society, it's a collection of individuals. A remarkably silly statement, because you have to have a culture and you have to have a way of dealing with each other, forms of dealing with each other in order to have any value in communicating as individuals and in finding out what your worth is, what the worth of what you're doing is, how you appreciate what others do, how we work together to get things done. You have to have a culture, material and otherwise. That's society that we live in. If you want to be an unfettered individual, make like Robinson Crusoe. Find your island. But once you get a man Friday, let alone a family, you start having relationships for which you are responsible. So we're all a piece of society. And we all therefore have responsibilities to it. Our government was set up to define one of the major ways in which we get things done that meet all of our needs as a society. That can only happen when we vote. Then our issues, our values get reflected presumably in our representatives, who then work inside the government to use collective resources that address the needs of all of us, not just some of us. When we don't vote, we don't even have a chance of making that mechanism work. That leads to the general welfare. That's really what we want to get done. Promote the general welfare. If you look at the preamble to our Constitution, you know the two highest, as scholars have said, two highest purposes in the preamble are promoting the general welfare and securing the blessings of liberty, both of which have to be in balance, neither one excluding the other. You will find some people that say that's all of lesser importance. The main part of the Constitution defining the branches of government, the rights of those branches, the officers, how they get elected, everything else, what the Bill of Rights is reserved to us, that's all the main part. Well, that's the mechanism by which you execute what's in the preamble, which is the purpose of the document and the form of government that we have. It's not like a preface in a book. A preamble is something different. Preface you can take or leave. Book starts at chapter 1. Call me Ishmael. That's the plot. Okay? It's not like that. The main part of the Constitution isn't the plot and the rest doesn't matter. You got to look to the preamble. So general welfare is important. When you look at it, though, again, it's those who vote that help create the general welfare. Those who don't vote do not. And this puts me in mind of that really vilified image of the welfare queen that Ronald Reagan used way back in the day. That coin was actually that term was actually coined in 1974, and supposedly it became a really serious issue with the welfare system. The person who games the system and exploits it for their own benefit while degrading the resources involved and making a mockery of it. Reagan used that in 76, and he was referring actually indirectly to a his public figure of the time who exemplified the welfare queen that was supposedly such a big problem. Tip of an iceberg kind of situation, whether or not that was actually true. But he didn't get the details right, but he was putting his finger on something that we can recognize. That's the human tendency to decide to give up, opt out, but live off the fat of a land we're no longer cultivating, and just leave it at that. Everybody can find some area of their life for some period of time where that basically was a syndrome we succumbed to, whether or not we actually made it a way of living in general. So we can recognize it's a piece of human nature. Having said that the welfare queen does exist in a way, we're back at the general welfare, and you, non-voter, essentially, if you don't vote, especially in the way I've outlined, consistently and intelligently, you are, in effect, a general welfare queen. It's the other people who vote who are doing the work to the best of their abilities. Please don't do that. Vote instead. Thank you for taking the red pill, Neo. Your patronage much appreciated. Now go and sin no more.